Hey guys, I'm Phoenix here, and let's talk about Space Engineers, shall we? It was released on Thursday into out of early access, and you can now play it. It's a finished game, and the developers have said that they'll come along every so often and add a few updates to it, but as far as we're concerned at this point, the game is done. So we should just very quickly talk about my biases towards the game. So first off, I was permanently banned from the Space Engineers Steam forums by a moderator who had basically taken a dislike to my opinion that there was some very serious issues with the development of Space Engineers, and these were issues that potentially the developers were not going to be able to fix because they were so deep-seated in the code that it would take an awful lot of work to get it straight. I also didn't like the idea that the developers seemed to be coding the things that were shiny rather than the things that the game actually needed to be completed. And we're going to see a bit of that later on. So, as a result, and as far as I know, I have not broken any rules, but apparently that was bad enough for me to be permanently banned from the Space Engineers forums on Steam, which also brings with it a... I can't upload workshop content or anything like that, any videos or any images that I make about Space Engineers. They are blanked from the community pages. So there's that. So when they released it into early access, what we had was a really good idea, I thought. You have a block-based game similar to Minecraft with a deformable block system which allows you to potentially have space battles, and then you build ships in space, and that's pretty much the game. That's the base of the game. Now, what I thought back then was that it could be a Minecraft killer. You just build on it. You add some more weapons, you have pressurized spaces, you have reasons to have pressurized spaces and reasons to run cabling to connect your generators to your stuff, and then you can have space battles because the placement of your wires, you can take a hit, and pressurization means that you suddenly lose all the pressure, you're moving slow, you can't hear anything, all that sort of thing. Really sort of good solid idea of base, and you just build on it, right? We didn't quite get that, but that's what we saw back in those days, and now we're going to actually start looking at the game properly. So, welcome to Space Engineers Properly. This is, of course, the main menu, and the sorts of things that you will expect are on here. Your new game, your load game, join game, options, your character, which customizes your character's appearance, that's got a separate segment for it, and then exit to Windows. Options are what you would expect. I will just briefly go over one of the graphics options, which I am not a fan of, which is the use of solely FXAA, which is a very, very cheap version of AA. Sometimes, in some games, actually you get better looks by turning this off and just switching it to none. It's not a particularly good type of AA, unfortunately, but that's the only choice that we have in the game. I'm leaving everything as medium, as that is what the game has decreed that my system can handle, and in fact, when I'd had it all on high, the game did actually complain at me when I first started this game recently. So, otherwise, everything is, as you would expect, a medium quality preset to be. So you would expect a stable performance with these settings. Now, if we just come out of that, there's no back buttons. They use these sort of weird crosses in the corner of things instead of just a good old-fashioned back button. But if we go into new game, we then see, the start of the game. This is what you want. Now, in this video, I'm going to start referencing other games quite a bit, because there are other games that do what Space Engineers do, but an awful lot better. So, if you want a space simulator where you just fly ships and you do missions and you land on planets and that sort of thing, you go and play Elite Dangerous. If you want something a little bit more exploratory with some kind of survival mechanics and building stuff, you either pick Astroneer or you pick Empyrion. if you want a slightly more systems-based building game, you go for Stationeers. As a result, what Space Engineers is this cluster of ideas, some of them quite good ideas, but they're not fleshed out. And the new game screen is one such area, because this is the part where you start to realise that Space Engineers doesn't actually know what it wants to be anymore. It was released as a creative builder, and they kind of bolted on a survival mode, but it was never going to be a sort of a proper fully fledged survival mode, and then suddenly they tried to make it that way, and it just doesn't work. But anyway, so we have 3 things here. So we have scenarios, workshop, and custom game. Custom game being the last one, but custom game is the one where you actually get into your survival modes. Scenarios, first jump, learning, survive, and never surrender. They're more like guided experiences within the world. I haven't done actually those 2. I did poke at learning to survive, and what I actually found there was sort of this series of waypoints, but no actual help. And I'm not completely certain why that was. But if we go over to custom game, we start to build a sort of a better picture as to how they want you to play this game. We have an option between creative and survival here, but survival is the one that's ticked by default. Default options are a very, very good way to get an idea of how the developers want you to play the game. So survival is checked. So let's click Star System, shall we? So survival is checked. Online mode, it's obviously offline. That's just a safer thing to do. It's not necessarily a developer choice, but more they know that the vast majority of people are going to just want to have a solo world. Autosave on, obviously, because you really want your save to be saved every 5 minutes. That's fine, that's good. And then we go into advanced and we start to learn a little bit more about the game. So this is basically how the game is balanced. This is what they have set. This game is balanced for these settings. And as you can see, I'm not going to go through them all, but things like sound mode, arcade, they recommend essentially at this point that you play with arcade sound, so you're hearing sound all the time, even in space. Whereas in realistic, you don't hear the sound in space, because you don't hear sound in space, essentially. And then you've got things like total part count. So 100,000 part count is the maximum by default, and you can increase it, but in doing so you could cause problems in your world. If you had a server, it could cause it to lag and that sort of thing. And then we get to the options, and these are very, very telling. When you have things like permanent death turned off, which is fine actually. Permanent death can be turned off. I mean, that bit's fine. It's more things like enable wolves, enable spiders are disabled. Spiders and wolves are disabled. These are AI features. The developers do not recommend you start playing with them, which is telling, certainly. The rest of it's pretty simple, and I think at this point we jump over to character creation, and then after that we are actually going to finally get into the game using these settings, and I will show you what the game is. Welcome to the Space Engineers character screen. Now this is something that you can access through the main menu, and it will give you an extremely long loading screen. Then when you enter the area and see that it's not actually that complicated of a scene, you might then switch from your male astronaut to your female astronaut, and again you get another very long loading whilst it does the model thing. This screen is very, very buggy. Sometimes it will actually apply these skins. As you can see, in this case, it hasn't. You might need to kind of turn things on and off again a little bit. Animate's alright, but it doesn't actually apply the stuff that you've chosen particularly well. You might have to unclick it and re-click it a few times to actually get it to apply. You will also notice that none of the colour here is kept in the skin that you've selected here, which is interesting. And then, of course, when you decide, actually, no, I want a male character instead, well, now you've lost any changes that you made to your skin, so you have to go through and reapply all of them. And there's a few that you can have. All of these skins are collected in-game, or in the case of the medieval skin, you get when you have bought medieval engineers. And I think there was another one, the golden skin, which I didn't get because I didn't log in at that point that unlocked it, and that was for owning the game since release or something along those lines. So yeah, there's that, and I think at this point we move on. So, okay, I'm going to give you my first impressions after probably about an hour and a half of playing the Moonstart in a Solar System Survival. I'm not going to be talking about much what's going on the screen. This is recorded separately. What's on the screen is going to be some gameplay of the first part, the first section, and we're going to cut to sort of my final impressions after maybe a couple more hours of play, see what I've got, and quite, where I stood. So there are a few thoughts that I've got. The first thing is the idea of Quick Start Custom. So if you bring up the tutorials by hitting F1, there's a whole list of help stuff, and quite a lot of that is not in text form, it's in video form. An awful lot of those videos are from beta. They differ from the Space Engineers that are here today. So in the very first video he's talking about quick start and custom quick start modes. They don't exist anymore. You now have 3 tutorial sort of scenarios, I think they call them, and you get 3 scenarios. Not quick start anymore. All your quick start stuff is actually in custom or in workshop. You don't actually get an official sort of quick start option anymore. The tutorial is meh. That's the best that I can say. I've had reports that the tutorials don't really teach much about what's going on in the game, and one of the biggest flaws of any tutorial is that it wastes someone's time telling them to do something that either they're already doing, or that something that doesn't just make sense in the game anymore. So I was talking to someone last night, and one of the things that they tell you to do is they tell you to go and gather iron ore. But you can't put iron ore in a survival constructor. It doesn't fit. So the game tells you to go off and get iron ore, but you don't need iron ore, you need just standard rock, which was weird. And he also said that the tutorial tells you to grind off the landing gear, when actually what you can do in theory is just unlock the landing gear. You don't need to grind it off each time you actually want to use it, but the tutorial doesn't tell you that. And that is a problem. Now, I did play some of the first sort of campaign type thing. Again, it was very, very odd the way it was put together. It wasn't put together in a way that you would expect a reasonably linear tutorial slash campaign slash something to go. So it takes you eventually to the moon base, and you're having quite a lot of fun actually bouncing around initially in the space station, and that's all great. And then it sort of leads you down, and you go down onto the moon, and you kind of go down this big pit, down this elevator, and it's all kind of, it's actually quite well put together. It does show you what you can do with the game. The downsides are that, well, the story, ultimately, because it's like, here's this sort of mysterious artifact. Quick, the security system has activated. And then you run into the tunnel. They're closing the blast door, which doesn't matter anyway, because you didn't come down via the blast door, you came up through the elevator, which is just so happens to still be unlocked. So this lockdown doesn't include the elevator that you came down on. Okay, fine. So there's that. Last thing I should note, and this is something that I will actually just cut to right now. In fact, there are two things we need to talk about. The first is the skin bug, which shouldn't be a thing on the basis that this is apparently a release. The skin for the tools applies after the tool is pulled out in most situations, if it even loads at all. I have had several instances where actually the skins on the items have not actually loaded at all, and so I've just been left with the default grinder or the default hand drill. As you can see, each time I pull out the hand drill, there we go, the skin hasn't actually loaded. This happens more often than you think. It's not just by spamming doing that all the time. It's literally just pull it out. Sometimes it just hasn't loaded. The other thing that we should also talk about is the grind of the game, which is a very big thing actually. When you first start, so I've started on the moon, and when you first start, most of your time is spent drilling. You drill out some rock, if it will let you. There seems to be some issues with collision when it comes to drilling into rock that's sort of too low to you. You might have to actually just crouch, which I don't know. It's strange because it does show that the drill is moving, and sometimes you'll actually get some sparks, but it won't actually dig. And the same is evident on slopes as well. Sometimes it can be a little bit finicky about if it wants to let you dig or not. But anyway, you pick up all this rock here, like so, until you can't pick up any more. You then walk up to your whatever it is. It could be your lander or whatever. You put your stone into here. It then processes your stone, as long as you've told it to process your stone, and it will craft what you've specified. As a result, it will kind of get you materials, and then those materials can be turned into resources that you can then take over to your stuff and weld it up. And as you can see, I've done that, and we can then move on to telling it to make the construction components instead of plates. Though I do still need some plates for some other things that I need, but production, basic components, construction components, just make me 200 of those, but it's not going to make me 200 because it doesn't have enough stuff. It goes through stone extremely quickly, so most of your time is going backwards and forwards from your pit, which I decided, you know what, I'm just going to make a pit, and this can be like the garage. I can have some ramps down here, so I can drive my vehicle down here into a blast door. We can have like some elevators or something, you know, just sort of general stuff. Nothing too fancy, just a thing really. So that's what I'm going to be doing for the next little bit of time, building up this base, and in a couple of hours we'll come back and I'll give you my final thoughts of the game, and we'll just kind of see where it is. So I'll see you in a bit. Okay, so we are now a couple of hours in since we last spoke. The base hasn't evolved very much. This is basically because the survival mode has been made longer by adding a very, very long grind period where you are just slowly gathering ore through rocks, throwing it into a refinery of some description, processing it, turning that into metal, and then going on your way. I am unable to progress at this point because I do not have the power to run the basic assembler, which, although it claims that it only needs 1 kilowatt of power to generate materials, even though I can give that via the solar panels, it won't do it. Going on the forums, they claim that actually it needs far more power than it actually claims it needs in the game, which is a little bit confusing. This is the sort of thing that needs to be straightened out. Does it require 1 kilowatt of power, or does it require 200 kilowatts of power? This needs to be stated clearly as to what it needs. As it stands though, I don't have any sun, so I can't create any power. And as a result, I'm stuck, basically. I can't make drills to make mining easier because it requires a large tube which you can only get through the basic assembler. So I'm stuck. I'm stuck in this grind period. There are other bugs that have been reported. I thought, let's try a wind turbine, because although it's the moon and although it claims that it won't be able to work on it, well, there was a user who reported on the forums that he was able to build a wind turbine and it provide power in the depths of a cave, which apparently, according to the in-game, it shouldn't be able to do. And, you know, that is a problem. The text, the tutorials, all the help information doesn't actually match what's going on in the game. What is a new player going to think? Who knows? As a result, I am basically to this point where I would say that if you were looking for a good solid survival game set in space, you don't buy Space Engineers. If you want exploration, you go down either Empyrion or Astroneers. Astroneers is now out of early access. It is a full title, same as Space Engineers, but there's far less bugs. It feels like a far more complete game, and there's no sort of restriction with grind. It's just go out there, do stuff. You can very quickly build yourself a nice little base to go to work from. There's no slowdown from needing to go back to a terminal or something to refill your oxygen and energy. You can just drop tethers which tether you to the base, and it sends you oxygen and energy to you. So you can just be out there and you can do what you need to do. There's no restriction on that. Empyrion still is in early access, but it offers an awful lot of what Space Engineers provides. And when I last played, it was kind of getting into a more sort of progression sort of state, where it was a little bit more defined as to how the progression should go. There's a little bit of that in Space Engineers. You have to build certain blocks to unlock further blocks, but as I said, I can't really do much at this point because, you know, I've got a door halfway down all the way down a hole, which I can't complete because I need components that I can only build in the basic assembler, which I can only use if I can possibly provide enough power to it, but I've no idea how much power the thing needs at this point. And the last game I mentioned was Stationeers, which is a little bit more engineering based. More electrical engineering than sort of rotors and pistons and that sort of thing. But from reports that I've seen on the forums, rotors and pistons in Space Engineers have a habit of exploding. I haven't got that far in the game because I don't have any power, so I can't do anything like that. But Stationeers is more you build systems to do things. It's again faster start, a faster duration. A longer duration between having to resupply your suit. So you can just get into the game and you can just play the game up to the point where, quite naturally, you will probably end up to the point where you can refill your suit because you've put in the systems to refill your suit, essentially. You've got to that point in the progression. By the time you start to feel hungry, you will probably have built yourself your hydroponics farm. You know, it's that sort of game. It is reasonably well balanced. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say, and I hope this video has been informative for people who were on the fence. It's a real shame that the game has gone the way it has. I feel that there's an awful lot of good features in there. Had they concentrated on those and built upon them, it could have been a really sort of fun game. Unfortunately, they kind of bodged in a survival mode, which is very grindy. And why would you have a very grindy survival mode? The creative mode is probably far more fun if you're a fan of sort of just being able to build something out of nothing, build ships, build engineering projects, whatever, that is probably going to be more the meat of the game. But if you were buying it simply for the survival mode, I would say try something else. There's an awful lot of other good games out there to try. But anyway, as I said, I hope this has been helpful. I hope this has been informative. And thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time.